Perhaps next time we can all go to the wonderful outdoor space at the Lutheran church this time of the year. Mark, you have a beautiful outdoor space that I sort of covet, even though I shouldn't. But in any event, one day we'll all be together in person. So this past April, the Jewish community celebrated one of our most significant holidays, and it was the holiday of Passover, as Father Carl said. Let me just give a little bit of basic information about the holiday for those for whom it's less familiar. Passover is a holiday whose sort of primary purpose is to celebrate freedom, and it's based on it's sort of built around the story in the book of Exodus in the Hebrew Bible about our ancestors' enslavement in the land of Egypt, and then God freeing our ancestors hundreds of years later from enslavement in Egypt. And so it's at once a moment of reconnecting to the story and experience of slavery and degradation, and moving through that to an experience of celebration, liberation, and freedom. The basic way that we celebrate is that we have a sort of celebratory meal called a Passover Seder. And two things happen there. One is that we tell the story of our exodus from Egypt. That's sort of the primary function of that meal. And the primary function of it is to make sure that we're telling younger generations about it. So that's one of the major things we do. And then, as we also just have a lot of joy in being together at that time. The other thing I'll say is that in the eyes of our tradition, Passover is the holiday of spring. It's very much a celebration of rebirth, of newness, of the season as well. So the sort of ask for us panelists was to talk about how this holiday particularly intersects with our own spiritual and religious journeys. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to sort of lift up about that. One is that Passover in so many ways is a holiday that exemplifies one thing that I really prize in Judaism, which is that it's a very interpretive tradition. Meaning one thing that's prized in our tradition is that, and this is particularly true in more progressive communities in the Jewish community, that there's many, many different ways to practice and many different ways to interpret the Passover story. So one thing that you might see at a Passover Seder, and I'll talk about one of them that I went to this past year, is you'll see very, very different ways of hosting a Seder, very different ways of understanding the meaning of the story of Passover. So, for example, one side of my family is quite traditionally practicing. So it's a very kind of traditional telling of the story, which really, really focuses on kind of God's role in liberating us from Egypt. In other Seder experiences I've been to, the primary conversation is about the ways that Passover is a symbolic story about all struggles for freedom that all peoples have ever experienced or are experiencing now. And it's a fantastic opportunity to think about the sort of social justice and liberation movements of our own time. So there's such a varied interpretation, and it really exemplifies the way in our community that there are so many different ways of practicing and understanding how our tradition bears on our lives. So for me, that's always felt really generative. The sort of creativity of our tradition always felt so generative personally to me. That leads me to two other things that I want to share about Passover and my own spiritual life. So as I said, it's really, really a holiday that's about a commitment to freedom. And for me, one of my sort of re-entries into Judaism as an adult was through the lens of social justice work. I grew up in a fairly traditional, what's called conservative Jewish community, meaning a community that's sort of trying to balance traditional practice and sort of the changes that the modern world asks us to consider. So in many ways, a very traditional Jewish upbringing. I didn't find it all that meaningful later in life, kind of left it, but then came back to Jewish life through sort of Jewish social justice communities. And one of the wonderful things about Passover is it really is an opportunity for many of us who are committed to the work of making the world a better place to really sort of reground in the possibility of that actually happening. There's sort of this nourishment that we get from this story of our ancestors' exodus from Egypt, that, miraculous liberation after years of bondage and oppression is actually possible. So it's this incredibly kind of nourishing story for many of us. And it's an opportunity to celebrate the ways that we have been victorious in issues of freedom and human dignity, and to look forward and vision for the kind of world that we want to build. So for me, Passover is this really sort of nourishing holiday in that part of my Jewish self. The other aspect of Passover that really sort of speaks to me is that there are many people who sort of take Passover as a holiday that speaks to them as a holiday about inner liberation, meaning that that for those of us who are invested, myself included, in spiritual life being so much about inner work, about sort of tapping into a sense of inner wholeness, or more and more becoming the kind of people we want to be, Passover has very much been transformed for some of us into a holiday that's about inner liberation. And that really comes from the Jewish mystical world, who basically said, when we look at the biblical Egypt, we should really understand that that's a metaphor for what's happening on the inside. If we have experiences of alienation, of oppression within ourselves, any ways that we feel narrow or constrained within ourselves, that's Egypt. And so Passover then becomes this celebration of the ways that we have become more free within ourselves, or the hope and possibility that we can continue to grow, that we can continue to become, have a deeper inner spiritual life. So certainly for me, one of the ways that I came back to Judaism as a kind of spiritual, was as kind of a spiritual practice, and a way to kind of cultivate my inner life. So in that way, kind of the themes of Passover have over the years really spoken to me. In that regard, we got to do a little bit of that at Temple Beth Torah this year in preparation for Passover. At least one person here was in our Passover spiritual writing preparation workshop, which was a moment to really think about what is my Egypt? Like, what are the things what have been experiences of narrowness for me, or what are things in my life now that I'm hoping to kind of leave behind? And for me, at least, I'll say it was a very rich experience of connection, but also a really rich engagement with the themes of Passover. So I think the hope for all of our Jewish holidays is that in one way or another, they are speaking to a really deep part of our personal experience and ourselves and our identities. And for me personally, it so happens that Passover really does, in a really significant way, speak to what makes Judaism really come to life for me. So I'll leave it there. That's about 9 minutes. I think that's enough for now. Thank you so much.
You are muted, Father.
Sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you so much, Mimi. I love the both the ritual practice as well as the things you brought up of freedom and growth, spiritual growth and healing. I think they were beautiful metaphors. Thank you so much. So, and I apologize for not announcing this is being recorded. I think Mimi was surprised when I was late in turning that button on. I apologize for that. But at any rate, what we'd like to do now is we'd like to ask, let's see, Borak, would you mind sharing a little bit? First, to tell us just briefly about Peace Islands Institute, who you represent, and then
Yes.
and then your own experience with Ramadan.
Okay. So I'm a physician scientist at Dana-Farber, and I'm a volunteer in Peace Islands Institute, and we aim to build bridges among the networks and connections, different faiths and different cultures, to reach better with by getting together. And we're mostly Turkish and Muslim, but this is our aim. And so Ramadan is a beautiful month for us. I actually have a presentation, a little bit like kind of pictures and everything. Do you mind if I share this?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Let me make you
Small presentation, yes.
okay.
Okay, thanks so much. So yeah, so what is fasting? I will start with this. Fasting is actually for us. It is not drinking and not eating food and being away from sexual desire from dawn to dusk. So there are 4 verses in Quran that says fasting, and I will go over them real quick because it explains and the benefit of Ramadan and everything. So there are a few benefits of Ramadan for us, for fasting and Ramadan, and there are moral, social, and in Quranic way, and also the spiritual benefits that we believe and we see. This is my experience in this Ramadan actually. And we have 4 more hours. It's ending by the end of this day. So those are the pictures that I took. This is really close to my home, and I'm really interested in photography. This is 4 Seasons in Boston. This is in Jamaica Plain. So the reason why I showed you, most of us pass along those beauties and we don't really see the pictures. But when you look at it, we really see that's something, and that's something that God gave us. So human nature is like, let's say you're going to the palace, you're invited to king, and you're going to that king's palace. And let's say you're in a room and there is someone that the king is ordering for you. You don't see king, and you will thank the vendors and you will thank the waitresses, but you won't thank the king because you don't see it. You don't see it's coming from there. So if every iftar dinner, that means the dinners, it is like a celebration in the palace of Allah. So we wait for his command, for Allah's command. We wait for it, to wait for Allah to say us, okay, let's eat. And then we start eating. So we can understand everything is coming from Allah. Everything, every beauty, every food, every drink is coming from Allah. And this is the first verse that says, "O believers, fasting is prescribed for you as it was before for those before you. So perhaps you will become mindful of Allah." So perhaps you will understand, you will be mindful of Allah. You will be aware of Allah. When you go to that palace, you will be more careful because you love Allah. You love God because everything is coming from the God. So you will be more careful. So this is the moral aspect. And I will just pass this. And in a social way, when you think that everything is coming from Allah, so that changes your way of looking into social interactions. So let's say you have a child like that. This kid is really sweet, but we're like this kid. When we look at ourselves, we're like this kid because we have something that we have, and we believe this is ours. So let's say your mother of this kid, and you gave money to this kid, and say to the kid, like, share it with your brothers and sisters. There are 2 ways to respond that request. So he can say, my family game, you gave it to my money and it's mine, and I'm not giving this to anyone. And the second way is actually the saying that my parents gave it to me, and they are the one who is giving, and they are going to give it to me if they like me, or they won't give it to me, but I know they're loving me and I trust them. That way you will start sharing with your brothers and sisters. So this is the second verse that I'm mentioning. That says fast the prescribed number of days, which is the month of Ramadan. And if you are sick or you're in journey, you will postpone it. And if you're not being able to fast even at all, if you have diabetes, if you have cancer, if you have something like that, then feed 1 needy person for every day. So this is the donation. So you will donate, you will give something to charity because you're all brothers and sisters in the world. And iftar there is like when we get together, we know each other, and that's really courtesy to see new people and get together from different cultures and different people. And the third and fourth way, I will explain it really quickly, is the third verse is about Quran, because Quran is revealed in Ramadan. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. That means Quran is revealed in the month of Ramadan. So it's like if you go to any mosque, if you encounter any Muslim, you will see he's reciting Quran, because it's the month of Quran, and we read, everyone in the world, every Muslim is reading Quran. So it's like a huge mosque, huge, school. Everyone is reading, everyone is reciting God's words. So yeah, and in a spiritual way, I have time. Yeah, okay. In a spiritual way, we remember how we are weak, because after 5 p.m. I got really weak. Even if I am 25 years old, I'm really weak. And I understood that. And with hunger, I understood that I need someone, I need Allah for him to give me God, for him to give me his blessings. And everything is actually blessing from God. Rain, food, drink, and everything. So that way you understand, and you say, you feel the desire to knock a door that won't close to you anymore, any day. And you just become more close, you feel more closer to Allah, because you know he's the one who creates you, and he's the one who creates everything around you. And this is the last ayah, this is the last verse. It says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. If my servants ask from me, where am I, what I'm doing, just say, I'm near, I'm close. And I will respond whoever calls upon me. So let them respond, let them call me, let them pray me, and I will respond, and I will make them in a straight, good path. So this is actually the fourth verse, that they are back to back. And that says, we will just pray to Allah at the end of the month and say, please give us the right way. Please give us the correct things that we need to do. And that is 8. Actually, so this is a question. I'm finishing up real quick. If this is a holy month, why do Muslims celebrate its ending? So that's a good question. But we celebrate being servants of Allah, and we celebrate being together and the beauties, bounties of God that He gave us. And Prophet ﷺ's practice was, he had a special dress for Eid. He was inviting everyone to prayer. He was greeting everyone. He was recommending everyone to say, give to charity, donate, because this is a celebration for everyone. This is not a celebration for rich and poor. And Hadith says the worst food is which is only rich, not for the poor. So this is a celebration for everyone. We got together, we pray, and then we start greeting each other. What if you're alone? What if you're not home? I'm away home right now, for example. All of my relatives are in Turkey. So what if you have no one to celebrate? That's another thing. While everyone is celebrating, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ saw a child who was crying. And he went to him. He asked, why are you crying? The boy couldn't look at him and say, I'm crying, I don't want to say anything. He asked again, why are you crying? And he just put his finger into his head. And kid says, my father died. And my father died, and I'm orphan, I'm crying. And everyone is celebrating the Eid. Everyone has new dress. Everyone has perfume. Everyone is greeting each other, but I'm alone. Prophet ﷺ says, I was an orphan too. I was an orphan. And the kid starts empathizing with Prophet. So he looked, who is talking to me? And understand he was the Prophet. So kid understands he was the Prophet. He was the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And then Prophet ﷺ says, this is the last thing. Will you be happy if I accept you as my kid? Will you be happy to see me as your dad, and Aisha, my wife, as your mother? So that kid, that alone kid, after that, he's the luckiest and he's the happiest kid after that. So this is what Eid is about. This is celebrating each other without a distinction, being poor, rich, orphan, and everything. So yeah. So I said this was the last verse, and it was saying, if they call upon me, I will respond. So I just wanted to make a prayer if that's okay with you, because I don't want to, I want to respect your time, but this is just, is that okay? Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We are the weak and you are the stronger. You are the one who responds to the distress when they are helpless. You are the closest to us, yet we are far away from you. You are the one who gave us a beautiful word, and we are the ones who is thankful for it to you. You are the one who gave us ability to thank you. We are your servants who loves you, but still sometimes you make still mistakes. You are the most merciful. We are the ones who make mistakes. We never prayed anyone else other than you, and we never seek help anyone other than you. We thank you, and please make us reach to the straight path with all of our loved ones. Amen. Thank you.
I mean, thank you so much, Borak. Thank you so much for that beautiful explanation from your experience of Ramadan. Last week, I had a chance to attend an iftar. He talked about iftar, and which is the breaking of the fast at the end of the day. And at certain times, non-Muslims are asked to be part of that. And I had a wonderful time there in this big tent in front of the Cambridge Public Library. So it was awesome. Anyways, thank you so much, Barak.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was COVID, so I couldn't attend, but I saw your speech and it was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. So moving along, and also too, some of the most profound things that come from the Quran. I've had the privilege to study the Quran myself, or a version of the Quran, I should say. And it's an extraordinary sacred document and a sacred scripture, and one that shares many things with many of us here, I think. So it's great. Now we move on, and we're going to ask our good friend Sidi Karam if he could share with us for about 10 minutes about his own experience, and particularly of the special feast in the month of April for Sikhs worldwide.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. It was so inspiring to watch my two predecessors on this online podium. And it's true, and it's inspiring to listen, and it's revelatory of the oneness of truth. And so first I want to just chant for a moment. Guru, Guru, Waheguru, Guru Ramdas Guru. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I was chanting to Guru Ramdas, who's the fourth of the 10 Sikh gurus. And each of the gurus, you could call them Moses-like, Christ-like, Buddha-like masters, who each of their lives embodied a different aspect of the truth. And Guru Ramdas was known, or is known, as the Lord of Miracles. And so when we chant to him, we invoke miracles into our lives and into the lives of others. My spiritual teacher, Yogi Bhajan, used to say, I don't believe in miracles, I rely on them. And when we gather, as we do, different faiths together, each of us as individuals and each of our faiths contains the same light of the same God at the core. And I believe that when we join together in prayer, in moments like this, we generate miracles. We increase, we expand that light dramatically. I think of myself as a spiritual mutt. Carl has heard me say this before. I was raised Jewish in a Protestant boarding school, went to a Quaker college where a number of my friends became Baha'is, and then became a Sikh. So I experienced the best of many faiths. And I believe that just as the white that I wear and that Sikhs wear contains all the colors, wearing white symbolizes the essential unity of truth in every religion. Everything I know is written on these pages. So the story of Vaisahki, the Sikh holiday, begins in long before it was established as a Sikh holiday in 1675. The Sikh gurus were both spiritual leaders and temporal rulers. So the ninth of the Sikh gurus was Guru Tegh Bahadur. And in his lands, there lived a pacifist Hindu community. The emperor of India at the time was a Muslim, and his, I think it was a 39-year reign, is known in Islamic history as a black mark on Islam. He sent a message to this Hindu community, convert to Islam or I will kill you all. The one thing you could never accuse this guy of was unclarity. So the Hindus didn't quite know what to do. And so, but they knew that the Sikhs had a martial tradition. And they sent a delegation to see Guru Tegh Bahadur and explained their plight. And Guru Tegh Bahadur said, the resolution of this situation will require the sacrifice of a man of high consciousness. And his 9-year-old son, who would later become the 10th Guru, was standing next to him and said, "Father, who has a higher consciousness than you?" So the Guru said to the Hindu delegation, "Go to Delhi, tell the emperor that if he can convert Guru Tegh Bahadur to Islam, that you'll all convert too." And then the Guru made his way to Delhi to meet with the emperor. And the emperor made up all of his arguments why he should convert. And the Guru said, "Islam is a beautiful religion, but I've already made a commitment to my faith and I'm not giving it up." And so the emperor made his argument of last resort: if you don't convert, I'll behead you. And at that point, some of the emperor's aides went up to him and said, it's generally considered bad luck to kill a holy man, a worker of miracles, even one of a different faith. And so the emperor said, "Okay, work me a miracle and I'll spare your life." So the Guru began talking about the miracle of the sun rising in the morning and the flowers opening up in the sunlight. The emperor wasn't interested in any of this. So then Guru Tegh Bahadur said, he asked for the equivalent of a piece of paper, a writing instrument, and a string. And he wrote something on the piece of paper, or wrapped it around the string and tied it around his neck. And he said, "That's all the miracle you're going to get." So the emperor had him taken away, and late that night, he was beheaded in a public square. And the guards began laughing, saying, "Oh, another holy man. You know, if he was really a holy man, we wouldn't have been able to kill him." Any Christian can tell you that's not true. And then one of the guards reached down and picked up the piece of paper, or the equivalent, from around the Guru's neck, and read it. And it said, "Here's your miracle. I gave my life, I gave my head, but not my faith." And then the guards realized what they had done. The next morning, the 9-year-old son of the Guru, who would soon become Guru Gobind Singh, said, "What, weren't there any Sikhs around to stop this? Where were the Sikhs when this was going on?" And people said, "Well, there were Sikhs around, but we look like everybody else, and there was no way to organize." And so now, fast forward 24 years, it's April of 1699, and Guru Gobind Singh, who called all of the people in the area to a mountainside, a hillside, and he stood. He was the warrior saint. He stood on a platform before them with a curtain behind him. And he held his broadsword and he said, "Who will give his head for his guru?" And finally, one man came forward, and they went behind the curtain. People heard a whack. The guru came out with blood on his sword alone. Who else will give his head for his guru? Again, one man came forward, and said, Guruji, my head has always been yours. They went behind the curtain. People heard a whack. The Guru came out with blood and a sword alone. This happened 5 times. People were freaking out. People went to the Guru's mother and said, your son has gone mad. Please stop him. Some just got up and left, but many stayed. And 5 men came forward and gave their heads. Then their bodies were brought out front, and the Guru and their heads were sewn back onto the bodies. Part of the story is that there were different bodies. And the Guru began chanting Waheguru, 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 which is hallelujah. Waheguru, Waheguru, Waheguru. And his daughter was pouring holy water into the mouths of the bodies. And within minutes, each of the bodies began chanting Waheguru, Waheguru, Waheguru. And then the Guru stood them up and dressed them as I'm dressed. And he said, from this day forward, this is how a Sikh shall dress. And the 5 men are known as the Panj Pyare, the 5 beloved ones. The essence of the truth that Sikhism embodies is commitment. And giving your head is the ultimate commitment. And that day he created what's called the Order of the Khalsa, the form of the Sikh. And from that day forward, we celebrate that holy moment as part of Vaisahki. What's especially interesting to me, the whole story is quite interesting to me, but it's especially interesting in the context of interfaith work, is that a number of our religions call their spring holiday by the same name, Vaisakhi or Vaisakhi among Sikhs, Pasqua in Italian and Spanish is Easter, and it's the same word. P and B and V in linguistics is considered the same letter. So Vaisakhi, Pasqua for Easter, Pesach for Hebrew and Yiddish for Passover are all the same word. Vaisakha is a Buddhist holiday. Vasant is a Hindu holiday, the same beginning. And so to me, my part of my background is in linguistics. I ask, is this merely a shared spring holiday, hence the same word? Or does it symbolize the sharing of the essential truth, the oneness of God represented in each of our faiths? Is it linguistic evidence for that? My personal belief is that it's more the latter. And Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, which roughly translated means Amen.
Thank you, Siri Khanum. Thank you very much. Wow, that's a rough story, but a very powerful one of courage. And as you said, commitment. We Christians would call that perseverance as well.
Yeah.
So that's for sure. Thank you so much, Siri Khanum, for that. And that's for the special, what date is that celebrated on in April? Vaisakhi?
Well, it's this year. It was, I think it was the 13th, but we celebrate over about a week. You know, for example, our Gurdwara, our temple, we celebrate on one Sunday, and then the all the Sikhs in the area come to our temple, and then the next Sunday, or I forget which order it came in, we go to the Indian Sikh temple in Westboro. So it's celebrated over about a week, but it is roughly the 15th.
Okay.
Roughly the 15th of April. But it runs by the lunar calendar, so it's never the same every year.
Right, which many of our holidays are like that as well. So, yeah, that's amazing. Thank you, Siri Khanum.
You're welcome.
We ask also, now we ask Swami T. Would you mind sharing with us?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carl.
Sisters.
Yeah, so it's fascinating listening to all the presentations so far to see how much we share in common across traditions, although the commonality gets expressed in different words and through different rituals, but the essence, how much of that essence is shared. So the festival that Hindus have, among the few festivals during this month, so the one I would like to touch upon very briefly is a festival called Rama Navami. So Ram, I just kind of noticed the kind of interesting coincidence between Ramadan and Rama. The first four letters are identical. Here's your for linguistic investigation, Sirikaram. But also, Rama is one of the incarnations in the Hindu tradition. And I'll tell you a little bit about him, but let me say something about the second word, Navami. Navami in Sanskrit means the ninth day. And we just now spoke about the many festivals in the Eastern traditions being observed according to the lunar calendar. So it's the ninth day of the bright fortnight. And so that's celebrated, and that is the birthday of Rama. Rama is historically, giving the dates can be very problematic because there's such a wide difference of opinion between different scholars, because Rama comes from a time when you could almost say it's prehistory and before things were written down. But by some estimates, it could be at least 3 to 4 or probably more 1,000 years ago. So he was a king who grew up in northern India, and I won't go into the details of his story. Just kind of a brief outline would be that he was the eldest son of the king, and he was, according to the tradition of those days, was to be made the king. But by some wiles of his stepmother, he was exiled to the forest for 14 years. And his stepbrother, the stepmother's son, was told that he would be made the king. But there were 4 brothers, and Rama was the eldest. The brothers loved each other so much that even his younger brother, they had decided to coronate him, he refused to be the king. He said, Rama is the right person, my elder brother, but I won't be the king, but I will manage the kingdom while he finishes his 14 years exile. Now, Rama didn't have to go on an exile. He was pretty strong enough. He could have imprisoned both his father and mother and kind of taken the kingdom by force. But Rama is seen in the Hindu tradition as an ideal human being, something that provides inspiration to people down the centuries, even to the present day. So he said, as a dutiful son, if that's the wish of my parents, that I go to exile for 14 years, I will do exactly that. And so he goes to the forest for 14 years. Along with his wife says, I'm going to accompany you. His younger brother said, yeah, I'm going to accompany you. So 3 of them go. In the forest, his wife is kidnapped by a villainous monster who lives in the kingdom of Sri Lanka, which is identified with Sri Lanka, which is just at the southernmost tip of India, present-day India. And so his wife is kidnapped, and then Rama and his younger brother go. They take the help of a few tribals in that area to go across the ocean, kill that evil king, and the wife comes back, and then he's coronated king, and they live happily ever after. Now, apparently, it doesn't seem very dramatic in this just bare outline of it. It's just the kind of a very stereotypical story you might find anywhere. A good beginning, then there is some calamity, some kind of a villainous character, some challenging situations, and finally, the victory of the good over evil. Kind of a template you'll find in history and mythology in different traditions. The different specific incidents that occur throughout this story between Rama, how he functions as a son, what is his duty towards his parents, how do these siblings are related to each other, how they treat each other. How does this victory over evil take place? And so these interrelationships in different forms in society, they provide they become exemplars for the rest of us. And so over the centuries, many interpretations, many commentaries have been written on every little incident in Rama's story. It's come through very learned commentaries. It has come through folk tales, through music, through song. And so it's a very kind of a living tradition. And the way his birthday gets celebrated is, well, again, as Rabbi Mimi said, because the tradition is so old, it gets interpreted in so many different ways, and the celebrations are also in so many different ways. So one of the kind of public, kind of a dazzling way it's done, something that kind of awes everyone. In many big cities in the Indian subcontinent, they'll have this kind of a huge effigy made of that monster king who was destroyed. And they'll have things, kind of fireworks stuffed inside it. And then about 9 days before that, they will have a kind of an enactment of Rama's story done by local actors in different cities and different incidents. Every evening, they'll have these kind of enactment, and that entire story is reenacted over a period of 9 days. And at the end of it, on the 9th day, the day on which when that the monster king was killed, they'll set this whole effigy on fire, and there'll be all fireworks, and then there's big celebration and all of that. And you might probably find on YouTube many ways in how it's done in some parts of India. Personally, I've found that Rama has brought so much inspiration to me and to the people that I know. Part of it is also because although he's seen by some commentators as an ideal human being, an ideal king, an ideal husband, ideal in every way, but because of the qualities that he expressed and generated in his life, many began to see him as not just human, that somehow he had transcended his human limitations and acquired a stature of the divine. And so at some point, then we kind of reach a point where we see whether this human being, is it a human being who has risen above and become divine, or it's the divine who's kind of come down as a human being, the kind of a meeting point between the human and the divine. And so Hindus see the incarnation, and the Sanskrit word for the incarnation, the avatar, is, and again, the Hollywoodization of avatar today, if you say avatar, people understand very differently, but it's a very sacred term in the Hindu tradition, meaning a divine incarnation. And the divine incarnation is seen as the meeting point of the human and the divine. That is, when you see some characteristics in these personages, sometimes they look very human and sometimes they look very divine. This kind of a interplay between the human and the divine. And so the ideals of respect for the elderly, the ideal of the fidelity, the being completely faithful in one's relationships, the duties of an administrator, because he was a king, how did he administer his people, and so on. So in many different ways, Rama has provided that kind of inspiration to the people. And so these celebrations that these are held, and I suppose that's something that we see across religious traditions again, that usually they are centered around some historical event. But celebration, clearly, when there's a lot of good food and dance and singing and all of those things will occur in different forms in different places. But essentially, they become more meaningful when we kind of connect that historical event that occurred at some point in history to a present day situation. How does it impact me? How does it change me? And that's what even again, Rabbi Mimi spoke about the internalization of an external historical event. And so how the birth of an extraordinary being at some point in history, how can that divine be born in my own heart? How can the ideals that these people stood for become my own ideals? How can I, in my own little way, the kind of relationships that I hold in life, how can I make those ideals real so that it's not something I just adore and respect and think about fondly, but something that I live, something that becomes a part of the way I think, the part of the way I speak, the part of the way I do my work. And so Rama is a very living tradition today, although historically is a very, very old personage. And Rama and the other personality is Krishna. And Krishna is probably better known in the West because of the big ISKCON movement, the Hare Krishna movement in the mid-60s. And so I think Krishna is probably a better known figure. But Rama and Krishna are two very powerful ways Hindus' religiosity centered around these two major personages. There are many more, of course, but these are the two major ones. So I'll stop here, but these are something I thought I could share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swami T. Wonderful, fascinating, actually. It's the first time I heard the whole story of Rama, or at least the outline of it. So thank you so much, and very interesting, and lots of connections. I just can't help but see the connections between all of us in one way or another. Thank you. So last but not least, of course, is Reverend Mark Peterson, pastor of Christ the King Lutheran Church. Mark, would you like to share with us?
Sure, and thank you to all who've gone before me. I feel kind of more pressure in a sense, because if I say something wrong, I think there's more of a group of folks here who might take exception with that. Whereas some of you, your stories and days probably aren't as well known, and so maybe you know, if you wanted to make something up, you could. Though I know none of you did that at all, and but thank you, and just hearing those same connections as well. And I want to start kind of with a disclaimer, or I don't know. There's a lot of nuance between Christianity and Judaism when it comes to Easter, especially, and a lot of really poor misinterpretation that have led to tragedy throughout the centuries since the resurrection of Christ. And so I just want to say that, to acknowledge that, and to just do that, and to strive to be as careful as I can when describing what I am, to not certainly not disparage Judaism, but to honor it for what it is as well. And saying that, to start off, to say that we wouldn't have Easter without Passover. We wouldn't have Christianity without Judaism, because Jesus is, of course, Jewish, and it is a very Jewish story that he is engaged in when he is alive. And I think it's pretty well known that our belief is that Jesus was born as both the Son of humans and the Son of God. He was conceived, as the story goes, by the Holy Spirit. And so Jesus is living, and he's alive. He grows up, and he's doing his ministry, and he's doing it in a particular context too. He's doing it in the area of Judea and Galilee, and these are not free and independent Jewish states. They are under the control of Rome, and being allowed to function as Jewish states. And this is a very important part of that, is that they're being allowed to function in this way as long as they don't cause too much trouble to Rome. And there's some consequence there not too long after the time of Christ. And when seen in that light, the actions of the Jewish High Council of wanting to quiet down what Jesus was doing and saying, and the trouble being caused actually makes a lot more sense and is a lot more human response than they just didn't like him and whatnot that we so often give. They had to be very careful not to upset their Roman overlords, and great tragedy could occur. And I think those same political pieces are prevalent in all of our individual lives and our personal lives and our country, our world, and so on, and they continue on. So Jesus, the story of Easter cannot happen without then Judaism, and the week before Holy Week, Jesus enters into Jerusalem, and it's Jesus is welcome there. The people come and they wave palm branches, singing, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord," and right away the leaders are saying, "Be quiet," and Jesus is saying, even if they're quiet, the rocks will cry out, and this is done to show that the divinity of Christ, to the power he has, not just as a human being, but as a divine figure, and the idea that this divine spirit will not be assuaged by human, hesitation with it, or telling it what it can and can't do. It's indeed very confrontational in a sense, knowing Jesus has proclaimed that these events are going to happen, seeing the confrontation ahead and knowing what's going to happen, and doing so in a way that is a good message, because it's not God coming in to win the confrontation and crush us, but to win the confrontation and crush death, and that which gives us death, and especially the sin and hatred that we have for one another and that which God has made. And so the story goes on, and in Jerusalem, Jesus eats the Passover meal with his 12 disciples, his friends, and gives them a new commandment that's based in the old commandments as well, that they love one another as he has loved them, and calls upon them to show this love through service. Jesus washes his disciples' feet, so and proclaims that this is how you should be with one another, that the greatness is found not in how many accolades you can receive and how much you can domineer, but through your service. And shortly after this meal, Jesus is arrested and by the Jewish authorities, and he goes. Our friend in town, Reverend Bonnie, turned me on to the phrase that he goes into this willingly but not happily, and so Jesus is arrested and he's tried and he is put to death on a cross, which is not the doings of the Jewish folks, but it is the death penalty of the Roman Empire. And the cross is this very public, crucifixion, and it was done in its gruesomeness and its brutality to send a message to everyone: don't end up like that guy. And the cross is again as important to Easter as the resurrection piece, because without the cross there is no resurrection. And it's here on the cross that we see God's goodness, that Jesus, even before he dies on the cross, says, if I wanted, I could summon legions of angels to come and destroy you, but I'm here to show God's goodness and God's favor for human beings. And on the cross, Jesus is even killed with two others, and traditions differ, but he one mocks him and the other repents and sees who he is on the cross, and Jesus brings him in the fold, and Jesus forgives those who crucify him from the cross very publicly and very openly. That message is given so that we can see that, and the whole story is set up so there's not really many good guys in it, especially in the book of Mark, one of the Gospels. All the disciples, all of Jesus's friends, they desert him. The people who were cheering him yell, "Crucify him," and he's really there alone, and it's to help us all to know, not to humble us, not to make us feel bad, but to humble us and to see ourselves in even those who would do such things. And that's an important piece. And Jesus's friend Peter denies him 3 times and says, I don't. And so then that's Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, the events of Holy Week. And then on the 3rd day, he is raised. The people go to the tomb. His disciples, the women actually go to the tomb. The faithful women go to the tomb and see that it is empty. And the story continues from there. There's different versions of the story. And what we find as the good news of this is that death has been defeated. That the worst that humans can do to one another, and to that which God has made, does not win the great confrontation, that God wins the confrontation. And the story is good because Jesus then is raised from the dead. He's raised physically. And this week we read a story of him eating fish, and that's very intentional, that Jesus's physical body was raised to new life. And Jesus didn't go around after all those who betrayed him or those who crucified him and get even with them. Jesus brought to them, the first thing he greets them with is his peace, the peace of God, for them to be in relationship again with them. And so it's a story of relationship between God and humans. And it is a story that is based upon God's grace and goodness. And it is a story that keeps on going and going and going. And I just read, today in our gospel reading, our story reading, we read about Jesus being eating and dining and around a charcoal fire, the same type of fire that Peter had denied him with. Jesus is eating around him with, and asking him, do you love me? Bringing Peter back into this relationship with Jesus and into relationship with those who Jesus loves, and which I shared with the group is a pretty substantial amount of folks. Kind of all of us is what we believe. And this is through the years kind of changed for me, or continue the aspects of Judaism that are a part of our faith, and that Jesus brings to us are so important and so meaningful and so rich, and they just help to frame the story and help us to see that our story goes on and on. And did the Exodus have to happen for there to be Judaism? It doesn't matter. You don't need to argue and debate it. The fact that there are Jewish people here today shows us the power of that story. And I say the same to my people. We're here because these events happened, and and whether or not they did is not the debate, because it's it'd be very hard to wrap our brains around that. And yet we live out the truth of these events happening and the community that they form and the life that they give us. And it, of course, ties us in with Christ's death and resurrection. And we are, and for me, that's a very powerful thing, that we have been given this eternal life. But it's a last word that I'm able to say again and again when I send out prayers after someone's died, that we are comforted by the promise of Christ's resurrection, which we know cannot separate us from the love, shows us that we can't be separated from the love of God. And even more so, for me, growing in how resurrection is a part of our lives here and now today, the new life of spring, the new life that we are given after we go through hard things and see something. And just recently, I'll share a story of how, someone in our congregation, there's something really tragic happened to a member of their family. And shared how much this person had experienced then people helping her out and help and being there for her. And the idea that there's still goodness in the world, and is so important. And the Easter promise that this goodness will not depart us. It will not leave us. It'll be there for us to help us through all things, and suffers alongside of us. And it's such good news. And, we often ask, why do bad things happen? We often don't ask, why do good things happen? Why is there good in this world? And the story of the resurrection, the promise of Jesus, the Son of God and Son of humans, is important. It's the center of our faith as humans, and it gives me a word to say about our lives, and gives me a word to live by. And of course, it's for all people. Not to convert them, but to just like so many other faiths, we are concerned with the goodness of God's creation, with the loving of our neighbor. And to love God means to love your neighbor. So,
Thanks so much, Mark, for your thoughts and your own experience of Easter, which we Christians are sort of in the middle of right now. But again, thank you. I apologize. These rich, extraordinary sacred days, and to wrap them in 10 minutes each is a little difficult, maybe a little unfair. And I do apologize for that. But it is an opportunity, I think, to hear a little bit about how each of us in our different faith traditions celebrate our faith and our humanity, our communities, and so on. So right now, why don't we open it up for those who would like, and certainly the panelists and those and others who would like to share any of your own comments or questions. You can refer them to any one of the panelists if you wish, or to everyone in general.
So I have a few comments on Passover, because Passover is actually mentioned in Quran in Baqarah 56, I guess. Yeah, 56. And it starts with all children of Israel. Remember favors I granted you and honored you above others. Remember how we delivered you from the people of Pharaoh, who afflicted you with dreadful torment, slaughtering your sons and keeping your women. That was a severe test from your Lord. And remember when we parted the sea, rescued you, and drowned Pharaoh's people before your very eyes. And remember when we appointed 40 nights for Moses, then it continues again with several verses. The reason why I made a little bit comment about this is because, it says, remember when you were a foreigner and when you were actually being tortured. And it says, it's actually describing something like Holocaust. And I think Yom HaShoah was in the last week. And describing that when you were in Holocaust, remembrance of something like that is really important. And Quran also says, remember those things and how God saved you from that moment. And also in Leviticus it says, behave, you shall not behave stranger to the foreigner, because you were a slave in the Egypt before. So it is kind of, really common for all of religions to have a respect for a freedom of religion for everyone. So that's, that when I saw Passover, that those are the things that reminded to me.
Great. Thank you, Barak. Thank you very much. Interesting connection with Islam, Passover.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you're welcome.
Anybody else? Comments, things you noticed?
I wanted to say just after, as I was listening to Mark, it occurred to me that there are parallels between the sacrifice of Guru Tegh Bahadur and the sacrifice of Jesus. that each was a great master who sacrificed himself for others. And I think there's a huge paper that can be written there, but it's certainly a significant conversation to have. And again, the more I look at each religion, the more similarities I find in the face of difference. If you look for difference from religion to religion, you'll find it. If you look for evidence of the oneness of God, you'll find that too. And I believe it's set up intentionally that way to make us work harder to get to the truth that everything is one, just as God is one.
Right. Thank you, Siddhikana. Yes, I was doing the same thing as I was listening. It was just the first thing that popped up into me in my mind were the connections made between each of the stories. It was very interesting. I don't know if you've done that after listening to these the stories of these feasts. Sorry, the sacred days, but also how they mark the identity of the followers of these faiths, and how they, not just their identity, but how they connect with each other and with the world around them through these things. You mentioned one thing there, Siddhikana, which was the figure of Jesus and the figure of the Guru in your story there. And Swami T also mentioned the whole encounter between the divine and the human, and how that I think it's happened in all of our stories in one way or another. I think it's been pretty extraordinary that we all begin with these stories, these narratives from our scriptures or elsewhere that somehow are passed on and part of the living memory of the faith communities we belong to. I think that's amazing to me.
I have a question for Swami T. So what Borak said about Passover sparked this question that for us, the story of our ancestors' exodus from Egypt really animates so much of Jewish moral teaching, particularly this sort of obligation to not oppress the stranger. And so many others all over the Hebrew Bible, it says, don't do or do X thing because you have the life experience or the soul of the stranger. I wonder about the story of Rama that you were talking about. Does that similarly kind of animate Hindu moral teaching among many other stories in your tradition? Like, does it function in a similar way?
Yeah, absolutely. And both at the individual level as well as also at the community level. In fact, the ideal state or the ideal society oftentimes get described in many Hindu books as Raja. Raja means the kingdom of Rama. So whenever in any place people are living happily and harmoniously, they like to believe, well, this is being done according to Rama's principles. And this is at the community level, but also individual level. If there is a person who lives truthfully, honestly, does the right things, then they say, oh, this person is blessed by Rama. So yes, a kind of a moral code does seem to emerge from his life. I mean, Rama wasn't like a lecturer or anything, so it's more from his life of how he dealt with people. Rama there are no books he wrote or anything like that. So it's more from the incidents from his life that the moral lessons are acquired by the society. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
The book of our lives. They're the true story, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anybody else would like to chime in or say something? I was looking on chat, but I don't think anybody wrote anything on chat. I did put something on chat if you're interested, and that is the name of our Interfaith Alliance, Metrowest Interfaith Dialogue Project, and also the website. If you've never gone there, you might want to look through there with some of the things that are going on with regard to interfaith dialogue and collaboration in our area, and things that we've done together, and some interesting things that are going on. And I guess I just want to make, we don't have just a few minutes, but maybe if somebody, just to throw out a question there now, and then.
Carl, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I did see a hand from Diane and from Priscilla.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Before you offered a question, I want to make sure we hear from.
Okay, absolutely. Why don't we do that? Priscilla, why don't you go first?
Okay, all I really want to say is thank you to all of you.
Priscilla, you froze. She froze. Well, we got the thank you part. That's good. Oh, there you go. You froze there for a minute, Priscilla.
Always. My
Okay.
computer always freezes. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody.
Priscilla, we're not able to hear your sound.
Never mind.
Poor Priscilla's having a problem. But if you want to write something on the chat, feel free to leave
Okay.
it. Yeah, I'm so
Priscilla,
sorry. And someone else raise
if
their
you
hand.
close your video, sometimes. Sorry.
Was somebody else that raised their hand?
I had raised my hand and
Oh, Diane.
it's kind of, gone off to the side now, but one of the connections that I was thinking about in all this is the celebrations and how these stories are passed on, not necessarily by church worship, but by families and by meals and by gatherings and by connection, not by separation. It's all by connection and joy. There's joy despite what the holiday may represent. There seems to be a real joy and celebration in all of this. And I think as Christians, that's one of the things that we hope to reflect is the joy of in our tradition, the joy of Christ and the joy of sharing. So anyway, that's kind of something that I was picking up on.
Thank you so much, Diane. Yes, that came across in practice, all the different stories, by the way, that connection, community, joy, it's experienced there, solidarity, beautiful. Priscilla left.
Can I just say one thing about joy? Thank you for that observation about joy. And one of the questions that comes up in the Hindu tradition often is that while we all experience joy, but these festivals, we keep on having festivals because there is a great joy at the time of festivals, then it kind of, doesn't really always remain at that peak. Then after the festival is over, then that joy level comes down, and then we have our usual anxieties and worries, and then until another festival comes and we have a time to celebrate. So one of the questions that often comes in Hindu texts is there a way of having kind of an eternal celebration, a joy that will never go away? And what is it that will prevent this kind of ebb and flow of life kind of going back and forth between moments of joy and then suffering and joy and suffering and joy and suffering? Is this how it is going to be eternally? Or is there a way to have kind of an eternal celebration? And that's some of the kind of question many of the thinkers grapple with. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
Thank you, Swami. Just in the last minute or so we have, I just wanted to share with you also in the chat, Priscilla, who had a hard time with her computer, I wanted to thank all of you. I wish the world you could listen to discussions like this so that they can see how alike we are, all from the same seed in the ground, no need for hatred. Amen, sister, amen. So that's for sure. And then Judy left us a message as well. Thank you, Judy. In these times of many people focusing on differences, thank you so much for helping us see our commonalities. So thank you so much, Judy, for that comment, and Borak as well. Thank you so much for your beautiful words. So here we are, folks. We've come to the end of our program. I'd love to extend the discussion a bit more, but we can't, unfortunately. Just a reminder, if you ever interested in future events we will be doing down the line, just check on our website. They'll be in the Holliston Facebook as well, and Patch. And a thank you, first of all, to all the panelists. We thank Mimi and Barak, and we also thank Swami T, and we thank Siri Karam, and we thank Pastor Mark. Thank you guys so much for sharing your faith and your dedication as faith leaders in our community. Thank you so much for that. And I can't help but think, as just to close, with Judy and Priscilla had mentioned that, we're all extraordinarily different and unique, of course. We have lots of differences as well. The commonalities, though, are the things that are probably the first things that enlighten our minds and our hearts. And I think that's a wonderful place for us all to begin. We all have very separate, or I should say different traditions that are unique, powerful ways that the divine has worked through all of humanity. But there's another thing that is referred to in our commonalities, and that is we all have one voice. There's only one interfaith voice. And that voice, those hands and that heart is extraordinary and extraordinarily important in a time where we're terribly divided in our communities, not just here in this country, but worldwide. So our interfaith voice is a sure voice for all of us. So I would like to just leave us with that powerful message that's been given to us by our panelists, and that is the power of our one interfaith voice that comes to us through many unique and wonderful traditions of the works and the power of the divine creator. Whatever you call the creator, Allah or God or divine being or whatever we call God. And in, of course, the Jewish tradition, you don't call God anything, just acknowledge him. But at any rate, thank you so much. And I pray that you and I will all be part of that powerful one interfaith voice in the world today. So terribly needed. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, you too.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, thank you.